Indeed, African countries are actually at a point where they are struggling with their debt that has gone, uh, in significant ways. Because if you look at the debt figures, just at about 2010, the debt burdens were about 500 billion US dollars, but today we are talking about 1.8 trillion when it comes to general gross government debt, and this debt has serious implications. And of course, the first implication, even before we get into the implications, it has many causes when it comes to why African countries manifest unsustainable debt burdens. First, it starts with issues around illicit financial flows, which affect African countries quite a lot. You have heard of the Mbeki report that put these figures at about 50 billion. But then an UNCTAD report puts these figures at close to 90 billion that leaves African countries through illicit means. This means this is money that actually leaves the country, African countries, through means that cannot be taxed or through means that are unaccounted for. Right? And it actually puts African countries in a situation where they keep reaching out their hands to borrow in order to finance their development, to make this social investment or to realize the social investments that they need, to promote the sustainable development goals and other development goals that African countries seek to achieve. Then, besides that, there are issues around debt governance, which is quite pervasive because many African countries are struggling with issues of good debt governance. And that is why we at AfroDat, we have put in place what we call the African Borrowing Charter that actually enumerates how African countries should be able to manage their debt in sustainable ways based on the principles of constitutionalism, based on principles of transparency and accountability. But evidence has shown that countries are actually struggling when it comes to issues of debt governance. This itself contributes because countries borrow, and then at the end of the day we keep asking the questions what countries actually did with the borrowed money. Because when we look around, we see that poverty is still prevalent. There's still infrastructural gaps in African countries, and the tax base remains very lean, which means that there is actually very little value addition to our natural resource base, and it ends up with a very lean economic base that doesn't support the ability for countries to mobilize resources to be able to service their debt and, of course, at the same time invest in their development. So this itself, together with the nature of the global financial architecture and the lending terms that are not favorable to African countries, have actually come together to actually put African countries at a situation where they are struggling, with their debt burdens, where they're struggling to service their debt and at the same time struggling to finance their development. And as we speak at the moment, close to 50% of African countries use about 30% of budget revenues for debt service, which is quite a lot. It means you mobilize resources that are supposed to go in to social spending, investment in development, investment in infrastructure, but a good part of it, 30% of it, end up going in for debt service. And even at that, this is not reducing the debt burdens.